We need to save time this week, David. I'm going to be late for my weekly croquet meetup.
Croquet meetup?
No time, David. Let's just do a really, really short ad this week.
All right. Really short ad it is. Ready when you are.
Cool. My story is bad, David.
Your story is bad, Donald?
Yes, my story is bad.
Well, good news. This week, we at the Ritwit are sponsored by the Story Goodinator.
Whoa, my story is good now. All right, thanks, buddy.
No problem, I guess.
Welcome, fellow nerds, to another episode of The Ritwit, the show that gets straight A's in English and gives 0 F's about integrity or common sense.
You know, I can't even argue with that. My GPA would have been a lot worse if I worried about common sense.
That's true. You only got such a good GPA because you didn't worry about comments. This is falling apart.
It's falling very quickly, but that's normal for our show, isn't it? Which is why this line is terribly apropos.
And speaking of falling apart, what will we rip off from this month? No.
How is falling apart?
I don't know.
Whatever. You're first. Go ahead.
I am first. Oh, I am first. Am I first? Yeah, I'm first. Okay. Well, first off, though, how are you? We haven't said that in a while on the show.
Yeah, it's been a hot minute since we did that. I'm doing pretty good.
Good. Okay, shut up. I'm doing well, by the way. In true Matt Donald fashion, I'm not ripping off a book or even a movie this time, but a damn video game, and for a silly reason.
Yeah, that sounds very, very you.
Silly me. Anyways, I've been replaying Rise of Nations, a strategy game I've always been a fan of. David here probably remembers the fantasy spin-off Rise of Legends.
Ah, yes.
With the Vinci and the Aline and the Quaddle, and the love triangle between Giacomo, Lenora, and Ari. That's a good game too, but for different reasons. Very creative, that game. I'd rip that off at some point.
Maybe you even mentioned it on the very beginning of the podcast when we first started doing this.
I don't even remember. Maybe.
God, I have to listen back far enough to do that.
Who wants to listen back to the early episodes when you haven't found your footing yet? Well,
I mean, you got to start somewhere.
I guess.
We started somewhere.
Listening to the first few episodes of Paleobites, I thought, that one, I've had the formula there.
Pretty much from the beginning,
pretty down pat. Surely it's
Speaking of listeners, you can go check that out as well. Please do.
But for the earlier episodes, I cringe, as I say. In each episode, I and a rotating set of guest co-hosts instead of in each week, I and a rotating series of guest co-hosts.
Oh my God, 1 word difference.
2 word differences. Set, week and episode, and set and series.
Oh, fair enough.
So, it's no good.
It's just terrible. Just terrible.
Yeah. And also, I say it way slower. I'm like trying to enunciate more because I'm trying to be professional. I'm like, welcome to Paleobites, the podcast where blah, blah, blah. My name is Matthew Dahl. And then by the end, like episode, I think like 15, I'm like, welcome to Paleobites, the podcast, blah, 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 blah.
Well, I mean, it's kind of like even a microcosm within an episode, you'll be like, welcome to Paleobites. And then by the end, it's like, okay, but what are we rating this thing?
What are we rating this damn thing? All right, anyway.
But seriously, if you haven't and you're interested in prehistoric animals, go take a listen to that.
Yes, indeed. Thank you very much. But Rise of Nations is more historical based than Rise of
history!
Legends.
Oh, yeah. Wait. They don't have dinosaurs. Too bad.
No, they don't.
I was going to say.
I was thinking
you would have said that like immediately if they had.
I was thinking if they had any birds.
Oh, okay. Fair enough.
There's some hawks that fly around the map sometimes.
Fine, dinosaur descendants. I can't deny that.
They are still dinosaurs, technically. Well, know more about
dinosaur descendants.
But they're still also dinosaurs.
And for more on that, go listen. We've already done the dang. Moving on.
We're fish descendants, but we're not fish. Well, I guess taxonomically speaking. Never mind.
Taxonomically speaking is not the Ritwit, so let's move on.
Okay. So it's more historical based. It has a ton of different factions with unique bonuses. And like Empire Earth, another game David is more familiar with.
more me than you in that one.
You start out in ancient times and progress all the way to the modern day. Although in Empire Earth, you go into the future, though, right? It gets real sci-fi at the end.
Yeah, you can have like spaceships and spaceports, and it's awesome. I never actually was good enough at the game to play it all the way to the future, but I saw that it was a possibility.
You can probably set,
Well, I mean, if you start later, of course, you could do that too.
Right, and I'll talk about that here with this, but in a bit. what I like to rip off, though, is how it goes so into detail with the tiniest things that really show the makers cared. Like Age of Empires, there's a universal tech tree and unit list with a few little variations for each faction. But unlike Age of Empires, the units look different based on what the faction is, even if they have the exact same names and stats. It always bothered me in Age of Empires 2 that the swordsmen, for example, all had the same European-looking model, regardless if you're playing the Britons, the Chinese, the Huns, or the Aztecs.
Yeah, because the Aztecs had English armor, right?
Or the Huns. In Rise of Nations, though, the units all look different. The Chinese swordsman has Chinese armor, like, the helmet, and the Aztec swordsman has a spear and Aztec-looking headdresses, and so on. Even though the unit has the same name and the same stats.
I mean, you have to try and make them visually distinct, and the more you put care into that, the better a game's going to be received, I think.
Right. Well, I mean, that's the thing. Like, they didn't have to do that because Age of Empires got away with not doing it, but they chose to. And
well, Age of Empires is also kind of like the bare minimum. It's like they're there as lip service, but then once you look at the actual sprites and whatnot, most of them are just the same because it saves time.
Right. It's just it is always kind of bothered me. Like even like the newer expansions for Age of Empires, because they're still updating that now with the definitive edition.
Oh, are they doing that for 3 or for like the original?
They did it for all 3 there now.
Okay.
But they're still adding content for 2 and 3.
Makes sense.
They're ignoring Age of Mythology though.
I'm so mad about that.
I want Age of Mythology definitive edition. Anyways, so
do this.
But anyways,
what was the name of that studio? I don't even remember anymore.
Ensemble Studios.
Ensemble. There.
They are long out of business.
Well, that probably explains why.
Forgotten Empires is the studio that's handling these.
Are you listening, Forgotten Empires? We'd love to sponsor you. Please
yes.
Get in touch with us.
I think they have a lot of...
You should make the definitive edition of Age of Mythology.
I think they have a lot of Ensemble employees, but I'm not sure.
I mean, it would make some sense.
So they also, I think, maybe I'm wrong here, I think they handled the Rise of Nations Extended Edition, which is like a new version to work on monetization.
Tying it all back, speaking of Rise of Nations.
Anyways, so... Also, your worker units, called citizens in this game, all look different, too, and even have coats on if the map is snowy.
Details.
Yeah.
Great.
You know, like how the villagers in Age of Empires, like the male...
They were still, like, bare-chested
The male's
all the time.
One's always bare-chested. The female one always wears a dress. Like,
yeah.
But like I was going to say earlier, it always bothered me because they had, like, some new African civilizations for Age of Empires 2. So you can play as, like, the Malians and, like... Who are some other ones? I don't know. Ethiopians, some other ones, and all their units are still white because they didn't change the sprites. So
talk about whitewashing.
Yeah, I feel like they could have made an exception there.
They should have anyway.
Yeah. Anyways, so also you can limit the ages you can play in a game in Rise of Nations, like we were talking about with Empire Earth as well.
Yep.
And while there's always 7 levels for each research branch, the names of the levels change based on what the ages are. So normally, for instance, the first science research level is called Written Word, and the 7th is called Supercomputers or something. I don't know. But if you limit the game to just before the Industrial Age, and the final science level is called Evolution.
So when you say limit the game, you mean like ending before the Industrial Age?
Well, like that's the last one. The one before the Industrial Age is called the Enlightenment Age.
So ending at the Enlightenment, like you wouldn't go past that.
Yes, that would be the last age you'd research. So, if you do that, the last science level is called Evolution, and all the ones in between are changed to fit with the limited time frame. And it does this based on wherever you start and stop. So
there you go.
It's pretty cool for all of them, like the military research, the civics, and commerce. Even if you limit the game to only 2 of the 8 ages, there's 7 differently named levels for each research branch, all based on what those ages are.
Now, I'm assuming those names don't change much between factions.
No, they don't change at all between factions, but they change based on,
what your limitations are.
Yeah, exactly. So, these are all just nice little details that they didn't have to do, but chose to because they cared that much.
Yep.
I could definitely incorporate that into my writing, putting in fine details to differentiate certain things despite most people not caring if I just copy and pasted, for instance.
White sprites. African civilizations.
Yeah, I'm not ripping that off. Well, that's what I said. I'm not ripping that off. Like, the citizens in African civilizations here are black. So,
yeah.
Anyways, another fun thing they have in this game is that certain factions have unique units that go beyond the timeline of their actual history. Because you're playing as these factions across history and guide them into timelines they never got to.
Yeah, the Aztecs probably didn't make it past, but in this game you had to build it. So
yeah, like the Aztecs, they had one of their unique units is Jaguar warriors, of course. But in the industrial and modern ages, they get Jaguar infantry, which are modern assault rifles. So cool.
And you worship at that altar.
So cool. Anyways, that's what I'll rip off a part of a video game. What about you? What book have you been reading?
Well, I recently
Still reading
finished-
Lord of the Rings.
No, I actually finished that one.
Oh, okay.
Having recently returned from a vacation where I didn't have as much time to consume media versus, actually socializing with the family.
Yeah.
I'm calling on some ones that I typed down a while back and haven't mentioned on the show yet. Lazy? Probably. Timely? You bet your sweet page count.
Yeah.
The BBC show Merlin, which happens to include Katie McGrath in a starring role, and as listeners probably are aware, Katie McGrath seems to be an object of both of our attentions.
Yes. She
Inspired me.
She is one of my celebrity crushes. The other being Charlie Hunnam for some reason.
Yeah, there you go.
I'm straight, I swear.
Chris Evans' biceps. No, anyway, inspired me to write a...
I mean, not that I'm concerned if anyone thinks I'm gay, but gay panic jokes are so 90s, but just letting you know. Or, you can think whatever you want about me. I'm comfortable with myself. Clearly.
The show Merlin inspired me to write a quote-unquote ranger fic based in medieval times. Problem with medieval times? Death is stupid common.
Yeah.
Which means that the rangers, again air quotes, would regularly die and need to be replaced.
Some of them would get the plague.
There are all sorts of character hijinks to be had, from constantly shifting team dynamics and what happens when someone completely conscious of the fact that they aren't first choice still have to be drafted onto this powerful team.
Ooh. Well, you can make them sort of wizards, I guess.
I don't know about wizards, but
or have
they're
some
wearing
sort of
special armor.
Have some magical armor or something.
Right.
That might keep them alive a little.
A little longer, but, life expectancies weren't very long back then, and that's something you'd have to deal with, right?
Yeah. That's why everyone had 1 billion kids,
Yeah, everybody. Because
only 500 million of them would survive.
So this one is somewhat timely because I am still working on this next show that I'm going to reference, which is called Ultraman Ace.
Oh, another tokusatsu show.
It's styled as just the letter A, but that kind of trend in Japan to use ace rather than simply pronouncing the letter in the decade that this show came out. Sometimes in tokusatsu, the crew will go on location for a little while and take full advantage of the vacation.
Yes.
In this show, Ace, the defense team has a mere 7 members, and apparently 2 of them are both from this place where they vacation.
Oh, nice. I know they do that a lot for filming. I was watching this video about the making of the logistics of making Avengers Endgame from this channel. It does logistics and stuff. Windover Productions. It's a great YouTube channel. It's usually about planes for some reason. But they talk about the logistics of filming the Avengers, and they talk about the scene in New Asgard, and they talk about how they did a location scout to find the place and all the things they did once they found the place. That is a real town. I think somewhere it's in Scotland. It's real close to Edinburgh, which is where they filmed an action scene in Infinity War. So that worked out. So they could just move production from there, from a bigger city that wasn't too far away.
Right. And the other thing about location shots as far as movies go is that, if you need to borrow resources,
yes,
and you're near a place that offers them, they probably got film crews from Edinburgh, so they didn't have to bring out everybody.
Well, then they could probably rent equipment. They talk about they didn't have to transport millions of dollars of filming equipment. Also, a lot of the locals were extras in that scene.
Easy way to do it.
Yep. And the catering was they hired a local restaurant to do catering for everyone to support local businesses.
Yeah.
And so they want to make it because they know that filming a big budget thing, filming on a place like that is a burden for everyone there. They take over the town for a couple days, so they want to make sure everyone comes out of the experience enjoying it. And it's worked in the long run too, because that town, I forget the name of it.
Well, and
it's a big tourist attraction now.
It's major PR for the location that it is, right?
Yeah.
So this town is probably touting filming location used in Avengers, kind of a thing.
But yeah, so that's a cool thing you can do when you film on location. So.
It got me thinking that apparently 2 out of the 7 elite people in all of Japan from the same place If I ever write a show akin to Ultraman, I would go ahead and make a full-scale operation where each locality, each state, gets its own team.
Ooh.
Not only that, but they would occasionally rotate duty and give the organization some sense of scale.
That makes sense.
Rather, there are 47 prefectures in Japan.
Oh.
If you chose the best person with like varying specialties from each one, that's 47 people. They're at 7, and 2 of them happen to be from the exact same prefecture.
There would be some overlap, wouldn't there be? Yeah.
I mean, it's just ludicrous to me. So I don't see why you have to limit yourself. And so if I did this, that's why I'm inspired by.
Well, it makes sense to have these characters, change up to.
Well, the other thing is too, they're there.
Right.
And to give any kind of personal stakes, you have to have somebody from there. So the solution is that you have more characters that could be from any place, and so you remove that. Maybe even the true defense team is called Elite of the Elite, and then when, say, our home state, Colorado, rotates into duty, that's that team, but there may be one person from Colorado on the bit larger top
I know
group.
that because we always get more Marvel stuff, but in the comics, like a lot of characters switch around on teams a lot. Like Ant-Man has been in the normal Avengers and the West Coast Avengers before, right? So,
Fair.
And I think Iron Man was briefly in the Guardians of the Galaxy recently.
Yes.
So yeah, they can switch around.
We need to talk more about DC crap. DC, put out some good stuff.
I'm watching the Harley Quinn show. I would have put that in,
except
I already had this.
Off,
Well, no, there is. I hadn't. I only just started it like a couple days before recording, so I didn't have time to put it in here. And plus, I wanted to use my Rise of Nations example. Next week, I might use that as my
next set. You might use it
next
as
set.
example.
Yeah, sorry.
Who knows? We'll see what happens. Sure. Good.
By the way, I found my cha-ching sound effect I planned to use. So I have no excuse
not to plug
put
everything.
Put it in.
So for that, you should check out patreon.com/Matthew Donald. Cha-ching! And support our content.
Next week, we'll have new content for the Ritwit. Putting my foot down.
Wait, I thought that was too... Oh, never mind. Anyway.
I've been putting it off. It's because I have to sing something, and I have to plug in my microphone. I need to just do it. That's a hint of what it is, listeners. Go check it out when it's available. Cha-ching.
You're only adding your own words.
I know, there's been so many sound effects where we haven't even gotten to the main topic of the episode.
And speaking of which... We previously did a set on the troubles with making more episodic works.
Oh, I remember
where
that.
Everything's kind of formulaic, right? Mm-hmm. Now it's time to slide to the other end of that scale with heavily serialized stuff.
Oh, yes, of course.
Of course, while all of us probably dream of making something so compelling that once a reader hits book 1, chapter 1, maybe even page or paragraph or word 1,
yes,
or the equivalent if it's not a book, they're so engrossed, they'll keep on plowing through until the bitter end. Well, the problem is there are some traps that road provides for creators.
Yes.
One that comes to mind immediately is latching new potential audience members that come in partway through without too much hand-holding, so, the dyed-in-the-wool fans get frustrated with the repetition of details like that.
Right, of course.
For the moment, though, we start with the issue you can see in the title of what happens when an individual entry doesn't have so much amusement for the sake of lacing future plot threads. Sometimes writers struggle making things with a longer form through line consistently enjoyable as an individual episode or chapter. What causes this struggle?
When you have scenes that don't have the biggest action set pieces or the most interesting character narrative development, it can come across as a bit boring to read and very boring to write, honestly. I know I struggle with writing scenes that I keep the plot going but don't really serve a better purpose.
They have to be there, but you don't really care to write them.
Yeah, exactly. That's why I try to come up with ways to make it interesting and more fun for me to write. If it's boring to write, it'll be boring to read. You gotta figure out how to make each individual piece of the narrative interesting in its own right.
Yeah. I think the saddest part is that each entry in a series tends to serve two different masters.
Right.
That of one-session enjoyment and one of long-term story.
That's true. You want to enjoy the work as is, but you also need to enjoy it on the collective whole. I guess you don't need to, but
well, put it this way: if somebody's only watching one episode and it's the boring one, do you think they're going to come back and see what's going on?
No.
Even if you do a really good job of like cliffhangers or whatever?
I know I've shown you what I think are very funny episodes of Friends, and you've laughed a lot at them. You don't have much interest in watching the rest of the show, though. So
There's a lot of content in Friends, and the thing about Friends is that it's very much episodic
It
in
is.
my understanding.
There
such
are some
that you
arcs.
could watch them wherever, whenever, whatever order,
yes,
and probably
most,
not get lost.
Most sitcoms are like that.
But sitcom. I mean, it's the
They
genre
do have
thing there.
arcs, but yeah.
Sitcom, it's kind of a genre limitation there.
Mm-hmm.
Some writers worship at the altar of their favorite master and flat out ignore the other one. And
Right.
that's the easy route. I get it. The more ambitious our saga's inciting idea, the less we care if each single step is consistently fun.
Yeah, I'd say so. But you have to make sure that inciting idea really is that exciting of an inciting idea, or if it's not consistently fun, it's got to be intriguing of some sort.
Right. And I mean, as I said, this is going to be a balancing act. The best writers manage to balance this well, that each entry has something that makes it enjoyable, such that if someone sees it for the very first time in the middle, they have a good time and maybe they decide to keep going.
Right.
But also, they're not letting the plot go stale, stagnant. It needs to keep moving.
Yeah.
Depending on how large an idea we're talking.
Well, and one of the ways that stories do remain stagnant is through filler, of course.
True. Now, that's a great segue into the next question.
Thank you. It's almost like I planned it.
Almost like you planned it.
But I didn't. Off the cuff.
Yeah, right, sure. For what it's worth, filler is, of course, a big problem with serial works. Talk about anime shows that they don't have enough manga left to adapt, and so they have to come up with something. That kind of thing.
Right.
If you're mandated 20 episodes, but only have enough content for 10, what is a writer going to do?
Again, if you gotta find a way to make each individual episode interesting. Not every episode needs to have some purpose in the main plot, but just because it doesn't factor into the narrative as much doesn't mean it can't be important. You can have great character growth in these filler episodes, letting the characters develop closer into what they need to become for the more important moments later on. So even if it's not important to the plot, they can be important for the character, and therefore important to the story. Like, those things where it's like, it's technically a side plot and it doesn't really have much to do with the main plot.
It doesn't have anything to do with the main plot per se, but how the character grows through that incident is relevant to the main plot.
I wish I could come up with some examples, but you know what I'm talking about, though. So
Not Rhea.
Not Rhea?
Not Rhea, the old...
Oh, I thought you were talking about some dumb tokusatsu show you were talking.
No, I'm harping on you again.
Old Megazoic stuff.
Yes.
Pre-published version.
But the new version, you know where to find it. Anyway.
Thank you.
It's worth mentioning, this question expressly addresses episodes as well.
Mm-hmm.
Obviously, we typically tend towards more like book-type stuffs, but this content, this set, really is based more around a theatrical presentation.
I mean, it can work for books.
It can, but like chapters, I mean, the argument still applies to a chapter as well.
Yeah.
So I just want to
and also
put
like
that
think
out
about
there,
like
even though we're
Harry
talking
Potter, where like every book is standalone, but as they go on, they get more and more interconnected, and like you realize, okay, it's all been connected, and this isn't just, this is another fun year for Harry at Hogwarts. No,
except the last one he wasn't.
Exactly. Spoiler alert.
Spoiler alert! If you haven't read Harry Potter,
I don't
and the
have a
Deathly
spoiler
Hallows.
siren sound effect, so that one's not being edited in. So feel free to make it, you want. I don't have to do any editing. Thank you.
Anyway, so Harry Potter is kind of the exception that proves the rule, though, because she went in knowing there were going to be at least 7 installments. That just the design of her story led to that. Some of us won't have 7 books,
but they do have ideas in mind.
Fair.
And like I knew when writing these new Megazoic books that my series on Amazon that there was going to be 4. Yeah, exactly. So,
well, my thought on the filler question. Narrative storytelling isn't a straight line. Sure, while between point A and B a straight line is the shortest distance, it doesn't need to be, and maybe even won't be, simple and easy. Adding a couple of turns to make the resolution take longer is probably okay. Start by looking at your overarching story and see if you can feasibly beef it up without getting too much.
Right.
Once you've maximized that, it's time to check on those lesser characters. Could their adventure fill some time in an episode while you still serve the main story? If it's something important for the character, it is still relevant, even if it's not central to the plot you're writing about most commonly, most frequently.
Right, exactly. And like that's the thing. Like you said, beef it up. So that you can beefing it up to a point does make it more filling, but it does increase your cholesterol. Makes sense.
I get where you're going.
Okay.
After these,
Speaking of which, want to get burgers after this?
No professionalism on this podcast at all. And
I know
you
this
still
great,
listen.
I know this great place. I'm not going to say it though, because I don't want to advertise them. I guess. Plus, I don't remember.
They aren't paying us. Well, let's not advertise them. After those options are exhausted, the simple options, try for a subplot that can be resolved quickly.
Yes.
It doesn't have to be in your original skeleton either.
No, it could just be a
as
one-off.
As long as it has a quick enough resolution, or you have a resolution that can work within the frame of your story.
Mm-hmm.
With any and all of these, there's no substitute for experience and proper planning to estimate how long it will take you to write them.
Right.
If you're not under creative constraints from someone else, those draft attempts may add up, but help you figure out just how much space you need to perform certain plots.
Right.
By the way, an aside, if you're the only creative controller, why choose the wrong number of chapters anyway?
You never know. You're writing it, and something may turn out one way. I don't know.
For what it's worth, I tend to have a skeleton and then kind of write by the seat of my pants as I'm influenced as I'm writing, which means that sometimes the thing that attaches to the skeleton, the meat and the bones and skin, and the bones, that's the muscles and the skin and everything else, it doesn't match exactly what I had in mind, but that's why I only have a bare bones.
Yeah, and that's what I do too. And I guess what I meant for like the wrong number of chapters is more like for if you're writing TV and the network says
again, this is, if you're the only creative controller.
Yeah.
If you have to answer to somebody, that's its own business,
Mm-hmm.
which we have talked about, but let's not go into too much detail there.
Right.
Now, ideally, you'll have your readers come in from the very beginning, word 1, they're hooked, and go from there until word 2,500,600.
I think that's already longer than the Harry Potter series combined.
I'm sure it is.
But
I'm sure it is.
It's about 2 million something, all of them.
But occasionally you'll get readers/watchers/listeners who have come in part way, like to this podcast. Thanks for listening. How do you get them caught up?
They might have listened from episode 1.
You hope they do.
If they had, why have you wasted your time with this? But thank you so much. And if you
show your support on Patreon.
And if you haven't listened to them, well, I guess go listen to episode 1.
Well, episode 1's probably going to turn you off, so stay here. We're better now. But anyway,
it's not bad.
It's not bad, but it's certainly the very first episode. We didn't figure ourselves out. How do you get those new people caught up without boring people who've been there the whole time?
Having quick little reminders for new readers at key points where the information becomes important to know I think that works. But keep them brief while also making them succinct and catching people up.
Mm-hmm.
Like, again, to use Harry Potter, every book usually starts off with, I'm at the Dursleys. This is what happened-ish last year. And this is why I have to hide my powers. I
think for Rolling, though, it was kind of a formula, and that's why it always started at the Dursleys and then went into something else.
Right, but also it put little things there that just reminded you, okay, this is what's been going on.
Suddenly writing letters to a godfather. If you don't understand, read book 3. That kind of stuff.
Yeah, exactly. But just little things that told you what was going on beforehand. And so just in case, for whatever reason, this was your first book, or I guess to remind people who would spend a long time between each book, which I guess if you're reading them as they came out.
It was a little longer than if you had them all on your shelf and just picked them up when you went to the next one. I actually...
you did, yeah.
I've done that twice. This is a sad thing. I did it once when I was visiting your house while I was living in Japan, but also before that, there was a time I challenged myself to see how fast I could get through. And I got through book 3 and part of book 4 on the same day that I started one.
See, every time I read the Harry Potter books, I start getting bored midway through Order of the Phoenix. Like, that book is
Order of the
long.
Phoenix is a bit of a slog, but
Yeah, like, and so I've read like the first 4 books several times. I've only read the last half of Order of the Phoenix and the last 2 books once.
I feel like
So.
I feel like the new tagline of the Ritwit should be
Marvel and Harry Potter.
no. Remember, everything is somebody's favorite, and somebody chose us.
Those poor souls.
Anyhow,
but I also, for my books, I did this too, but I've
Sure.
seen other people do this too. You write little story so far segments at the beginning that people can read if they choose to catch up on what's happened or skip if they want.
well, and the other thing is, succinct, you mentioned, and obviously condensing the entire plot skips on the finer details for larger form. They started a war. They're in the middle of this war, kind of things,
Started a war. Poor guy.
Yeah,
What the heck did you do?
Something very wrong. Anyway.
Like, if it was something stupid, like you crossed yourself, but you went the other way, like how the Russian Orthodox people do it, I think.
I don't know enough about the Russian Orthodoxy to say anything about this, but for whatever reason.
Anyways.
Yeah, I mean, those things are there for people catching up. It's been forever, and because it's presented in the book, they have the option of choosing to move straight to the story or recapping.
I've read that some people, and this is a bit of a side tangent here, some people, when there's a prologue to a book, they skip the prologue. And that's annoying and disrespectful. Like, they're like, oh, I never read prologues. I always skip them. I'm like, well, then if you get confused about later events or think they're not developed enough, that's on you, not the story.
Yeah, I mean,
Like,
well,
it's there for a reason.
yeah,
Like-
it is. Because wasn't it?
It is. They're like, oh, if it's important to the story, it should be in the main text. It is important to the story,
It's
and
in
it
the
is
same
the
pi-
main
It's in the same
text.
spine.
like,
It's in the same spine. It's just not chapter 1. Big whoop.
yeah, just if you choose to skip the prologue and then complain that something doesn't make sense later, that's
That's
your
your
fault.
own fault.
That's
yeah.
your own damn fault. Anyways, rant over. I don't usually.
We did a set on prologues, by the way. You should go.
I
listen
don't
to that.
usually do prologues, but in my last Megazoic book,
Well, I mean, if you're
I did. So.
Well, I think, if I'm remembering correctly and trying to be spoiler-free here, that it made sense to have a prologue because you had to address something that happened far in the past that was only going to be relevant to that book.
yes.
And you had no reason to bring it up beforehand, so why would you put a prologue for that in book 1 when you're not seeing this pay off forever?
Right. Exactly. So
It is there intentionally. The writer intended that. Therefore, it should be something that you consider. Now,
Yes.
I'm not going to tell people how they have to read. That's their own business. But I agree with you on this
Oh, well,
mini
thank
rant.
you.
Anyway, as for me, entry point characters are great. I mean, you can't do this every episode. It starts to add up. But the reason entry point characters work well, they aren't familiar with the details. A proxy for the newer audience.
Yes, the audience surrogate.
An explanation is expected if it's a new character.
Yes.
Hopefully, it's presented in a way that seems enjoyable even to those who have watched the show or read the books from the very top.
Right, exactly.
A sample. The character heard something off-screen as a debrief, but when confirming with the characters that have been there the whole time, they actually got it wrong. By correcting the misconception, you inform that new viewer at the same time.
Smart, double up, kill two birds with one
stone.
stone. I hate that saying. I love birds. Also, why would you waste a good stone like that?
Sure, it's the stone wasted. But yeah, you get them caught up simultaneously, and it's just a quick thing. It doesn't take too much effort. But as I said, you can't use proxy characters all the time.
Yeah, that'd be really weird and kind of forced to justify a new proxy character and explain everything every time.
Every single episode. That would get too repetitive.
Yeah,
However, that is one method.
it is.
What methods might you use to spice up an entry that feels boring, but is vitally important to the almighty plot?
One thing I do is have fun banter between characters. I love me some banter.
I overlove banter.
So it keeps the vibe entertaining during the times the reader has to pay attention. if it's important to the almighty plot, then they better be paying attention.
I mean, you'd hope they are already, but
There are actually a lot of different tactics writers use to spice up these scenes, and it depends on the vibe of your story and what you're doing with it. Like, I know a thing Game of Thrones did.
have you even seen that show much?
I've seen bits of it.
Oh, okay.
I might watch some of it for Paleo Bites with friend of the show, Lexi.
Ah.
There are some episodes with mammoths in them.
Aha. I see.
So,
I see.
for the Paleo Bites Patreon, which is also this Patreon. So.
Oh, cool.
Cha-ching. One more. Okay. Anyways, Game of Thrones has a thing that they call sexposition, which doesn't have anything to do with doggy style or missionary.
I'm almost impressed you know those.
But instead it has to do with the characters discussing more important events and, exposition in scenes where they're just having or had sex.
Oh,
no. Because...
Wait, I got to tell you about this attack that we're having, by the way.
He's
They're
thrusting,
rocking in bed.
listeners. But see, because the audience, they
I'd
see
die.
boobies or butts or pecs, and thus they're assuredly paying attention.
But yes, I'm sure that by getting attention, by using skin, lots of it, you get people paying attention to what's being said.
And thus you use that to do the exposition. You're right. It's like, there was this attack going on.
He's thrusting, listeners.
We gotta send the others. But I'm afraid that my father won't let me. I don't know how the show goes. There are definitely other methods, so don't use the sexposition method all the time. God. But that is one way to do it.
Don't go through this exposition Bible trying to find the right one to deliver exposition.
Those are the only two I know. I'm sure there's like a reverse cowgirl or something.
I'm impressed you know that one. Anyway.
I don't even know what's reversed or what the cow or a girl is. And I don't want to know.
I'm pretty sure you know what the girl part is. But anyway.
I think I get that part.
Yeah. I don't know what kind of spice it amounts to, but this is the one where adding some personal connection moments would really help.
Yes.
Especially if it's, gravy compared to your expected runtime. You suddenly have more to work with. There's no harm in having more fun conversations that reveal the personality of your cast without being so high stakes that it isn't building to the ultimate payoff, also in caps.
Hey, speaking of steaks, you want to get burgers after that?
Another spice I frequently reach for. Who am I kidding? I don't cook.
Hey, speaking of cooking,
Yeah, I frequently use this tactic though, is some planning into each entry, depending on the project and constraints that I'm giving myself.
Mm-hmm.
I'll set a guide at the top of each chapter or episode, listing out a certain number of happenings, certain number of foreshadowing necessary events,
right,
and maybe some other notes to keep myself inside of both those masters that I mentioned earlier.
Right.
So, like for Starburst, with my co-author, we have a page limit per episode. And so if I get too unwieldy and all these things have to happen, then all of a sudden I have no space. And so you try and fit the needs of your episode with the limits that you put in place for yourself. So I think the ones I do for Starburst is like, I think I do 3 things that will happen, 3 things that will be set up. And that usually gives me a guide to work through.
It's good to have those little guides for what you do for episodes. We'll talk more about that as the set goes on. So
Presumably.
But yeah, so anything else for the good of this cause in particular?
For the good of this particular one, keep everything fun. You never know who's watching it for the first time. It has to be enjoyable for you to write, and it still needs to serve some greater purpose if it's serialized like this.
Yeah, exactly. And yeah, just making sure it serves a purpose, and if it doesn't serve the plot purpose, it serves a character purpose. So.
If it just serves a length purpose, then you might want to reconsider it. Just saying.
And also use sexposition if you dare. Anyways, that's it for this week.
If you dare.
That's it for this week. A huge thank you to all our patrons so far.
Which, if you want to become one, we talked about the website earlier in the episode. It'll be in the description as well.
But, basically it's patreon.com/Matthew Donald. You can contact us at MatthewDonaldCareer.com for any general questions to either co-host.
If you're going to address one of us, please choose David or Donald, since we share Matt and D in common.
Yes, specify which one of us.
But let's be real. If you're going to his website, it's probably going to be him.
Well, yeah. Well, again, once you get your professional stuff all sorted, when you have your own podcast, then we'll start plugging that stuff for you.
I've been working on edits for that stuff, but
cool. When's it coming out? When's the release date?
Well, I haven't set a release date because I want to have more edited first.
Yeah, that makes sense. You want to have a back catalog. Anyways, you can follow me at Matthew Don Creator on Facebook, at MatthewDon64 on Twitter, and MatthewDon64 on Instagram. Why 64? Because that's the coordinates of my secret hideout where I do all my juiciest writing.
Oh.
Latitude 64 degrees, longitude 64 degrees. Midwestern Russia, directly north of Kazakhstan.
Kazakhstan. Oh, boy.
Come visit. The winters are brutal, but in the spring, the flowers are just lovely.
All right, well, we'll be back next week with a different pitfall of writing serialized works. But until then, keep writing the good right.
I'm Matt Donald.
I'm Matt David.
And we've written the good writ.
See, it works.
It does.
It works great.
Bye.
Bye.
The
My story is bad, David.
Your story is bad, Donald?
Yes, my story is bad.
Well, good news. This week, we at the Ritwit are sponsored by the Story Goodinator.
Whoa, my story is good now.